Around this time every year, lingerie sales increase in the lead up to Valentine's Day. Take for example these two lingerie campaigns that launched for Valentine's Day 2024, literally while I was making this video. So Lana Del Rey for Skims and Rihanna for her brand Savage Fenty. But did you know that gifting intimate apparel is not a modern phenomenon? In the 17th and 18th centuries in England and France, intimate objects were also gifted during courtship or amorous liaisons as tokens of romantic intention and sexual desire. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of the history of courtship gifts and love tokens, as well as gifting on Valentine's Day in early modern Europe, to explore the history of Valentine's gifts beyond cards, flowers, and chocolates. So if that sounds interesting, keep watching. So the most popular story of Valentine's Day's origins lie in ancient Rome, when Pope Gelasius I replaced a Roman fertility festival with the celebration of St. Valentine. So St. Valentine was a Christian martyr who had performed several secret Christian weddings for couples when the religion was still banned. However, there is little evidence of anything resembling Valentine's Day being celebrated in February during the early Middle Ages. So it's not until the late medieval period that Valentine's Day, as we know it now, appears in the writings of famous poets and authors such as Geoffrey Chaucer. So yes, the Geoffrey Chaucer, who also wrote the Canterbury Tales, which many of you may have studied at school. Valentine's Day in their writing was derived from medieval traditions of courtly love that came from medieval France, particularly southern French courts. So courtly love was a writing convention portraying love between a knight and a married noblewoman. This love was all-consuming and it generally remained unconsummated. So the most famous example is that of Guinevere and Lancelot in the Arthurian legends. So this type of idealized courtly love championed the meeting of two souls and was both passionate and spiritual. And it usually involved, as I said, an unconsummated desire and intense devotion. And these were often absent in arranged marriages among noble audiences at the time, so obviously they became quite appealing themes. So Valentine's Day grew out of elite courtly love traditions, and it was first celebrated by the nobility in places like England and France. So one of the first references to somebody being a Valentine comes from a letter from Charles Duc d'Orléans, or Charles of Orleans, who was captured at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 by the English. So while he was in custody, he wrote to his second wife expressing his love for her as a gentle Valentine. So the earliest reference in English comes from a courting couple in Norfolk in 1477. So a woman named Marjorie Brew addressed a letter to her suitor John Paston, calling him, quote, "my right well-beloved Valentine." By the 16th and 17th centuries, Valentine's Day had developed into what we see today. So an occasion to give gifts, exchange written expressions of affection, and for having parties. So the act of giving gifts to our romantic partners on Valentine's Day is connected to historical rituals of courtship gift giving. So although my video today is about European historical customs, gift giving in courtship and marriage rituals, as well as love tokens, are universal and have taken place in many cultures around the world throughout history. In Europe, particularly early modern Europe, marriage upheld social and political order, and so it was an extremely important life event that was closely scrutinized. So in both England and France, the main focus of my video today, suitability for marriage, was based on various criteria. So age, wealth, social and economic position all played a part, as well as mutual affection. So courtships were generally long and involved many other people, such as parents, relatives, friends, and neighbours. Many historians have noted the immense significance that gifts carried during courtship, as a public display of giving and receiving showed mutual consent to the union and its public recognition. So in England, marriage could technically take place in civil ceremonies with witnesses prior to the Hardwicke Marriage Act of 1753. So gift giving became the physical embodiment of an actual union or a strong intent to marry. So in France, clandestine marriages that were once under the control of ecclesiastical courts, that is the religious courts, became subject to scrutiny from the French sovereign courts during the 16th century. So as a result, it became increasingly hard to marry without parental consent in France during the 16th century. So courtship gifts given to the bride and her family therefore provided concrete and public evidence of a couple's intent to wed. And it also established parental approval of the match. However, in both England and France, there was no accepted absolute agreement between theologians and canonists, as well as wider society, on the status of gifts and tokens. And while some courts accepted them as evidence that a marriage had taken place or intent to marry had taken place, others ruled that gift-giving did not legally bind a couple together. So gift-giving could be a purely flirtatious gesture or the act of a seducer who had no intent to marry. But what exactly constituted a love token or gift with intent during this time? Well, that's also been debated, as these gifts were extremely varied depending on socioeconomic standing and the seriousness of the courtship. So gifts given during this exchange could vary from the mundane, so household goods such as foodstuffs or animals, to very intricate and personalised things such as Welsh love spoons. So Welsh love spoons were elaborately designed and decorated wooden spoons carved by a suitor and given to his beloved as a sign of affection from the 17th century onwards. Items of dress, however, seem to have been the most popular gifts given during courtship. So these included things like gloves, handkerchiefs, shoes, girdles, watches, brooches, and most frequently rings, which is perhaps unsurprising as they are still obviously the most common gift given today in things like engagements. So it's important to note here that most gift giving during courtship was a one-way exchange from a man to a woman. So in a society where the social structure and stability centered on the household, where men were in charge or the head of a household, remember this is a really patriarchal period, young men found courtship possibly one of the most important performances of their life. So it tested their character and their masculine ability to woo and marry. So in this context, the act of gift giving during courtship asserted a young man's ability to secure a respectable place in society with a home and a family. So gift giving also forged an emotional connection between the couple. The act of gifting inherently intertwines material objects with emotion. So gifts can express thoughts and feelings that cannot be contained in words. Their exchange creates or reaffirms commitments in relationships, and they are often the cause of emotional responses such as tears of joy. So gifts can also be sentimental and bring up memories of our past or memories of another person. So in the early modern period, gift giving served both a practical and symbolic function. Specifically, love tokens helped couples to negotiate the process of falling in love. So two dress objects that were commonly given as courtship gifts were busks and garters. So the busk is a long piece of wood, metal, or whalebone that was placed into a channel of the bodies or the stays or very early corsets. And usually it was tied into this garment with a little piece of ribbon called a busk point. So busks were initially practical objects. They helped keep the female posture erect, they emphasized the fullness of the breasts, and kept the stomach flat. These uses derived from their function in European court dress that complemented elite ideas of femininity. However, during the 17th century and increasingly over the 18th and 19th centuries, lovers not only charged busks and busk points with erotic connotations, but also saw them as tokens of affection. Several plays, poems, and other types of literature from these centuries refer to men who bought or made busks for their sweethearts. So one 17th century French busk exclaims, "Until goodbye, my fire is pure, love is united." So 3 engravings correspond with each line: a tear falling onto a barren field, 2 hearts appearing in that field, and finally a house that the couple would share together in marriage with 2 love hearts above it. So during the 19th century, it was common for whalers who spent months at sea to make busks out of whale baleen or even whale bone and inscribe them with words of love and affection. So scrimshaw is what we call this now, and there are several examples in European, American, and even Australian collections. Similarly, surviving 18th century garters also contain embroidered sayings and verses. So garters were strips of fabric or ribbon that were tied around a woman's lower thigh or just above her knee to keep her stockings in place. So during this period, these objects were often embroidered with intimate sayings that expressed love or sexual desire. They were also charged with quite erotic connotations due to their intimate position on the female body. So in 1740, Elizabeth Montagu witnessed courting couples purchasing garters at the Northfleet Fair in Kent. So she described how couples would go up to different booths and buy garters with amorous posies. So some only wanted humble things written on them, such as, "When these you see, remember me," while others were more poetical and said things like, "Be true to me as I am to thee." So one 18th century French pair of garters proclaims, "Same heart, same thoughts," while another states, quote, "My motto is to love you, it will never change." Even an English pair contains the words, "Kissing where two lovers met." Although busks and garters were commonly gifted, their intimate position within or underneath clothing next to the heart, but also next to a woman's breasts and her nether parts, was exploited in erotic literature and on the objects themselves. So some inscriptions found on busks spoke of men's jealousy of busks, giving these inanimate objects voices of their own. So one of my favourite examples of this is the 17th century French busk, which is engraved with a man's portrait. And inscribed on the busk, it declares, "He enjoys sweet sighs, this lover, who would very much like to take my place." So obviously that place was not only next to his lover's heart, but also in between her breasts. Like busks, garters also contained verses acknowledging their intimate place on the female body. So a pair of French embroidered silk garters from 1780 proclaims, "United forever, I die where I cling." So in this context, where I cling has two meanings. So it refers obviously to a woman's lower thighs, which were only accessible to those most intimate with her and over which garters sat. And in the original French, cling is also a euphemism for an orgasm. So the busk itself could take on phallic connotations as well, particularly in bawdy jokes. So in Edward Phillips' book, The Mystery of Love and Eloquence, which was published in 1685, he jokingly wrote, quote, "A lady was commanded to put her busk in a gentleman's codpiece. Another lady was commanded to pull it out, which occasioned some sport, for she laying hold upon something else, after 2 or 3 pulls gave over, excusing her disobedience by pretending that the busk was tacked to the gentleman's belly." And at a risk of being struck down from YouTube, I will leave you to work out what was actually happening there, but needless to say, she was holding on to a busk and pretending it was something else. So women could also give busk points. So these were the small ribbons that tied these garments into the bodies or stays, usually at the top or at the bottom. And fun fact, these busk points are what inspired that little bow or ribbon that is often found on modern bras between the cups. So several sources from the 17th century allude to women's habits of giving busk points as signs of affection and promise to their male suitors. So this was a particularly feminine gift-giving or love token during courtship. But what do busks or garters have to do with Valentine's Day? Well, these objects were given as gifts. So in February 1660, Samuel Pepys noted in his diary that his wife's Valentine, Sir William Batten, had sent her half a dozen pair of gloves and a pair of silk stockings and garters for her Valentine's gift. And you can see here that it wasn't just spouses or romantic partners that sent Valentine's Day gifts. Clearly, Batten had drawn out Pepys' wife Elizabeth in a Valentine's lottery, which I'll talk about in a second. As well as garters, in the 17th and 18th centuries, women were also gifted gloves, handkerchiefs, money, portrait miniatures, and silk stockings from their Valentines. So although I've not come across any concrete evidence to prove that busks were given as Valentine's Day gifts, given their important place in courtship rituals for at least 300 years, it's quite likely that they were given too. While gifts like jewellery or clothing were commonly given on Valentine's Day in the 17th century, By the 18th century, Valentine's cards expressing romantic love were common as well. So these cards were based on earlier examples of Valentine's lotteries, which were common in the 17th century. So Valentine's lotteries involved participants all putting their names in a hat and each one drawing a name out of it. Whoever they got was called their Valentine, and they would write a poem using rhyming verse for each letter of that person's name. So these poems were then taken and often worn in a man's hatband for the ensuing days or pinned to a woman's bosom. So Sally Holloway has explored these cards and the way that they shaped practices of love in response to modern commercial culture that was developing in the 18th century. So it's a really fascinating article and I'll link it down below. So she has found that from the 1780s onwards, individuals could purchase Valentine's riders for a sixpence. And these riders often wrote about love and marriage to entertain and amuse and also to gift to Valentines. By the 1790s, you begin to see Valentine's cards, and these were manufactured and sold in shops for 3p each. Like Valentine's cards, over the course of the 18th century, Busks and Garters from England and France also began to contain increasingly similar decoration and subject matters as well as written words. So this suggests that while these objects remained love tokens, by the latter half of the century, they too became less personalized and began to be produced on a larger scale, just like Valentine's Day cards. By the 19th century, the number of Valentine cards sent each year continued to grow, from about 60,000 cards sent in 1804 to 80,000 in 1805 and 200,000 by the 1830s. So it's around 1840 that Valentine's Day became popular in the United States. So before then, this had really been more of a European tradition. But by the early 19th century, Valentine's Day cards took off and made Valentine's Day a popular holiday. In true American entrepreneurial spirit, Valentine's Day also became a great business opportunity. Businesswomen such as Esther Howland of Massachusetts, who founded the New England Valentine Company, also designed elaborate cards, and she became quite famous for doing so. By the 20th century in America and the UK, other gifts like flowers and chocolates joined cards as popular Valentine's gifts. So now obviously Valentine's Day is a multi-billion-dollar industry, with 15% of gifts being clothing and 19% of gifts being jewelry. So if you give or receive a Valentine's Day gift this year, or even a courtship or marriage gift in general, know that you're taking part in a centuries-long historical practice. So if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to learn more about early modern clothing and material culture from the 16th through the 18th centuries, please like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.